Welcome to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, on this episode, I have a discussion with Jeremey Booher, who is the former Nelson County ATC principal. And Jeremey was forced out of his position as a result of the unprofessionalism of the superintendent, Wes Bradley. For those that have been listening to this podcast with regularity, you know that one of the subjects that we've brought up on a consistent basis from a local level is Nelson County Public School District in Nelson County, Kentucky. And this is one of their former employees whose wife also worked in the same district. And he describes throughout this episode his entire time there, the way that he was treated, the way that his wife was treated, and how all of this happened at the hands of their superintendent, Wes Bradley. He brings up a number of specifics, including workplace bullying, threatening and intimidating behavior. He even brings up computer fraud at the hands of Wes Bradley, or at least what I would consider to be computer fraud, to say the least, and suggesting that others engage in it as well is apparently what took place. And we're talking about breach of contract from a superintendent. There is no doubt about it. So even if you don't live in the area, or you listen to this and you're just interested in American education, here's one of the unfortunate aspects that I would like people to understand is that the way that Jeremey and his wife were treated within this school district is unfortunately very common. It's a very common occurrence for superintendents to micromanage or principals to micromanage right down into what is taught within a classroom. And then they overstep their bounds, they engage in breach of contract, and they do so for the purpose of intimidating an individual and ultimately doing whatever they can to remove them, including falsifying documents, lying, spreading rumors, engaging in intimidation. These individuals have their playbook. Some of the worst people who happen to have positions of authority use these playbooks. And I myself have specifically described it in past episodes as the process, quote unquote. They have a process. They have a plan. They want to see it through. If you're not a part of that plan, regardless of how nefarious it is, they implement their process, which again involves some of the most unethical tactics that you could possibly imagine. So I want you to give a listen to this episode. Please understand again that you don't have to know all of the ins and outs of this particular location to get the bigger picture. The bigger picture, as I've always said, with what is wrong with American K-12 education is a lack of professionalism. It's a lack of good, morally sound people in positions where, frankly, they should leave other leaders alone. They should just leave them alone. And when they don't leave them alone and they try to micromanage, that usually means that they're trying to push something through that has no business being there in the first place, whether it's a policy, a program, whatever it may be. So I want to thank Jeremey Booher again for being on this episode. I hope that everybody gives this a serious listen, because what Jeremey is describing are the characteristics of one of the poorest leaders that you could possibly have within any American school district whatsoever. There is no doubt about it. This kind of behavior has no place in any American K-12 school. And when it's this evident and it's this obvious, it's time for that person to be fired. Because what he's really describing are not the characteristics of a leader. What Jeremey is going to describe here with the superintendent of this school district, Wes Bradley, he's describing the characteristics of a tyrant.
Gotcha. So I'm Jeremey Booher. I'm the former principal at Nelson County ATC. I was there for 5 years beginning in 2014. I went through 2019 when I got a new job and got out. Really to start, I started, when you work for the ATC, you work for the Kentucky Department of Education. So they were my employers. In fact, they did everything. You know, they wrote my check. All of my teachers, I had 9 teachers at the ATC. We were all employed by KDE. We were actually, employees of KDE. So I preface that because that's where I'm going with the story with that. So my first year, I had to collaborate with 2 districts, Nelson County, and then Bardstown Independent. We had students from 3 different schools, Nelson County High School, Thomas Nelson High School, and then Bardstown High School. And then at the end of my tenure, we also started receiving students from Bethlehem. We would also get homeschool students. So our attendance was growing. People wanted to be there. We had an exciting place to go. Let's see, probably my third year and everything was good. I'm going to kind of tie my wife into this as well, because really the whole story of everything that went on involves both of us. And to this day, I don't know if the bullying, the intimidation was directed at me going after her or vice versa. I feel like they started going after her to get to me because he had no control. But I'll tell a story of both. I started really, me and Wes used to play tennis all the time, and we'd play once a week for several months until it got cold, and we would play more. I used to beat him. I'm a pretty avid tennis player, so I used to beat him. The one time that he did upset me, he never played with me again. It was kind of funny. He beat me once, and then
that's hilarious.
He never played with me again. It was funny because the time that he beat me, I actually met another guy there right after that. Me and that guy started playing, all the time, and Wes never played with me again. So that was kind of funny. But to that point, that was probably me and him started. I'm probably my third year there. That was before he was superintendent. He was still at Thomas Nelson. My wife was a third grade teacher. Well, she did several different grades at Cox's Creek. She was a teacher at Cox's Creek Elementary. And everything was good that first year there. She had a great year. They hired in a new principal. She loved the principal. The principal that first year was there 2 years, and then she left. And then they hired. Then my wife actually got on site-based decision-making council, and she hired in a new principal, which she loved. It was probably one of the best principals she's worked for. But she got her in there, and then it all started at the end of that year. That second semester of the year, so Nikki, most of the teachers at Cox's Creek at the time were all from Nelson County, and my wife had come from a top 50 school in the state in Montgomery County, so she knew. In fact, she led a lot of the PD for what they were doing at Montgomery County, for how they became a top 50 school. So she knew a lot of the curriculum. She knew a lot of the stuff, and a lot of the teachers. It wasn't just one particular, but a lot of the teachers would bully her as if it was a bad culture at Cox's Creek. And in fact, I remember that year, like I said, our second year there, they actually gave her at the end of the year a book with Christina Aguilera. My wife is blonde-headed, brown eyes like Christina Aguilera. They gave her a book with Christina Aguilera on it instead of the Christina Aguilera title at the top of it. They put a piece of tape over top of it and said Miss Booher, and they gave it to her. And they were. It was just it was a goofy pick, but it wasn't like a mean pick. It was just kind of like, I'm picking on you stuff. Going to year 3, that picking on my wife became a lot more prevalent. They started, name calling behind, and it wasn't ever to her face. It was always stuff behind her back. It was, name calling. And I can't speak for her because it happened, of course, for her for 3 years. So she has a lot more of the details on that. But long story short, on her, she ended up filing a grievance with Bob Morris, who at the time was the HR director for Nelson County. And she told him everything that was going on. He agreed with her. He actually said, you're right. And this was the same time, I think the third year was when Anthony Orr was going through his problems at the time, and they actually got him out, and they were getting a new superintendent in there. So she filed the grievance. The HR director, Bob Morris, came in, filed it, and then he started working on it. Well, all of a sudden, at the end of that year, Bob Morris was gone. He was no longer HR director. So I never got the story on that. I don't know what happened. I don't know if, one plays with the other. I haven't seen him since. And he just kind of said it was a mess in Nelson County. That's what I got from him. But I do know that she had that filed, and that's when really all of her problems and then eventually my problems started. So that next year is when we had a interim superintendent. Like I said, this superintendent of Nelson County was not my boss. It was just my wife's boss. So that fourth year at Nelson County, there was one day that my wife was 3 minutes late to work. First time she'd been late in 4 years. Not a day or two afterward, they had her on a corrective action plan just for that. And really the biggest thing the corrective action plan said was that every day you have to come and sign in. She was the only teacher in the whole building that had to sign in when they got there and then sign out. So there'd be numerous days where, my wife overexerts herself as a teacher. She'd stay till 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. She couldn't even get in the office to sign out on the paper because she was still there. But she had to do it, and she agreed with it and stuff like that. She's also always had, migraine headaches, but then this started leading up to worsen them. So let's see, that second semester, they kept staying on her about the cap. She had started getting real bad migraines because of the stress of the work, and actually hospitalized her for a time. She came back, finished out the year, and that was that. Over that summer, she had not heard anything from the admin. Of course, that's when Wes Bradley was just hired, year 4 going into 5 for us. He took over for I think it was Tom Brown was our interim superintendent in Nelson County at the time. He took over for Tom Brown. She'd heard nothing about the cap. Finally, August comes around and she says, "Hey, am I done with this? I've done everything you wanted on it. I've signed all these timesheets, yada yada." And they were like, "Oh yeah, you got to stay with it." There was no rhyme or reason to it. So at that point, Wes Bradley got in there, had fired everybody at the board office. He did so by changing all of the titles to everybody. So instead of calling it a DPP, he put a title on it, called it something else. Instead of your special ed director, he changed the title, called it something else. And that's how he got rid of everybody in the board office, because you can't just go in there and say, "Hey, I'm firing all of you." If you get rid of the position, you get rid of the person. So he got rid of most everybody that was a director in that office, and then he came in and hired everybody handpicked that he wanted.
Let me jump in real quick. Okay, just to review. So he, in order to get rid of the people in the district office he didn't want, he just changed the title of their already existing position, and then told them that that their position was no longer available. They needed to find employment elsewhere, and that was it.
Right. That's it. So, like, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. The lady that I collaborated with a lot at the ATC, her name was Kim Brown. She was director of instruction curriculum she was director of curriculum instruction for the high school level, and then he had a director of elementary education. To get rid of both of them, instead of just saying, "You're fired," he did away with both of those positions, and then he came up with like I said, he got a fluffy name, so I don't know exactly the title of, like he'll have a director of innovation or a directorate of Karen Connect or something like that. So he comes up with these titles, which, if you look behind the scenes, they're still a director of special ed, they're still a director of pupil personnel there, but they're not called that because originally when he came in to get rid of everybody, he got rid of those positions to hire who he wanted in there to have him picked, just like you said. So I'd worked with Kim Brown. Me and Kim Brown worked great together. She was on board with a lot of stuff we were doing. We were actually looking at the ATC on my end. We took a trip up to Miami, Ohio, looking at their aviation program. We were going to start on aviation. We had also working with IHG Electrical in Bardstown. We had looked at flipping. We were overlapping a little bit. We had a carpentry program and a woodworking program. So we condensed and combined, and then realized there was a high need for electrical students in our building. So we actually came up with an electrical program. And we were doing a lot of innovative stuff, and Kim Brown was on board with that. I thought she was great to work with. But he got rid of her, and in that time, he put me on a committee to hire the new career and technical education coordinator, CTE coordinator. So they had, off the top of my head, I remember 2 applicants. I think there may have been 3, but I remember 2. And essentially there was 5 or 6 that were from the hired committee. He said, "Here's the 2 applicants we got. One of them we want, and it's just hands down. Look at her resume." What ended up being Laura Arnold, who was my boss. And Laura Arnold was actually the one from KDE that had hired me to Nelson County ATC. So this is the point where I noticed things were shady, and this is where it gets bad. Because to that point, I'd only played tennis with Wes, and this was really the first time that I've started collaborating with him because he's now full-time superintendent. So So we do an interview, which the interview is kind of weird that he does. It's not your traditional, tell me a little bit about yourself, tell me your strengths and weaknesses type interview. It's a whole, I can't even describe the interview. It's weird to say the least. We interview the two candidates, and then we extend the offer to Laura Arnold, which is essentially, like I said, it was pretty much a done deal that she was going to get anyways. Well, she came back and told Wes that the pay wasn't enough for the position, that she had turned it down. This was in June of, I left in 18, so this was in June, I think, of 18. So, let me make sure my dates were 19, 20, yeah. So this is June of 18. Well, then, all of a sudden, about 2 weeks later, he had notified the committee that he was going to work on the money, he found the money, and he was going to get Laura Arnold in there. Sure enough, about 2 or 3 weeks later, she accepted the offer because they'd found the money. So it's funny because to this point, like, nobody would ever know this because I had just talked to another guy I work with. His whole family's from Nelson County up here where I'm at right now. So I'd talked to him about it. And I was like, let's look up her salary. Because I knew, because she was my boss at the time at KDE, I knew exactly what she was making. She was making $100,000 on the dot. So I knew she had to get that. She would have to make more than $100,000. Well, when you look up her salary right now on Nelson County's pay schedule, it's only like 100. When you put in her index, her years, all that good stuff, it's only like 102, 103. So me and him were sitting there talking and thinking, a $2,000 to $3,000 raise wouldn't really entice her to leave KD unless she wanted out. Which she had a pretty good job at KD. She was over all 53 ATCs in the state. She was an associate commissioner, which is essentially second in power of all Kentucky schools. So why would you just leave for $2,000 or $3,000? The kicker is, and hardly anybody notices it unless you actually go to their salary schedule right now and actually look. There's a box to the right of the salary schedule that says any. I'm not. It's not verbatim, but to me, you can go look at it right now. It's essentially any above duty for any certified employee. Anytime work past your regular normal hours, we get paid $25 an hour. So I would venture to say, if I was a guessing man, and at $25 an hour, if you search an open records request for her salary, you're only going to see the $102,000, $103,000 that she's making. You're not going to see all the time that she's claiming for whatever that $25 an hour is going to. So I would venture to say, when she goes to board meetings, $25 an hour. For that 2, 3, talking to people, their board meetings go till 9 o'clock at night. So if she's claiming it from 4 to 9 o'clock, that's 5 hours, $25 an hour, which, you add that up over time, it's a lot. Because, my last year, we were working on a grant with Nelson County, Bardstown, and even LaRue County, and we were traveling all over the place. We traveled all the way to Houston, Texas. We traveled to Owensboro. We went all the way out to Western Kentucky to Fulton, Kentucky. And like I said, I guarantee that she's claiming that $25 an hour plus the mileage and all that. So even though her salary is showing $102,000, $103,000, I guarantee she's making bank just off of the $25 an hour extra.
Probably another $30,000 a year.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because even if you claim $25 an hour, just rough math, at a full-time job, that's $50,000 an hour, or $50,000 a year. So, I mean, you could potentially make up to that. And I think on an open records request, nobody would ever claim to check that side of it, if you did. So that, now that I see that, I'm like, man, that's the reason why, because he's made. So when there was that 2 to 3 weeks lull, I'd say he got that put on that salary schedule for that and just said, hey, claim whatever you want, and that's how we'll pay you. That's just a guess, but I mean, I've never seen any other salary schedule in the state of Kentucky say any above duty. And, like being like I had an IT teacher that was working all of like a club for Nelson County. He never claimed the $25. I didn't even know that there was a $25 an hour stipend that he could have claimed that there. That's something that's not published, broadcast, or anything else. So there was that. That was, like I said, that was June, July. Coming back into our last year, which is 2018-19, going back to August or so, my wife comes back in. They say your cap still stands. We still need you to sign in there. So all of a sudden, the bullying, like I said, this is Wes's first full year, was our last year there, me and my wife, 18, and all of a sudden the bullying ramps up big time on her end. She is getting picked on by the teachers, the admin, the caps. They're staying on her. They're wanting her to do this, that, and the other. And it was she was the only teacher in the building that was doing all the stuff that, it wasn't on a cap. And the crazy thing is they kept asking her for all this stuff, but she still has her evaluations. On her evaluations, they're all, perfect. Like it's good stuff. There's nothing they're putting on her instructional evaluations that are anything that you would say red flag it. So she's getting picked on. Her headache, it's causing her stress. I mean, she ended up having to go to a therapist. It caused her headaches. It just drove her crazy. And the therapist even would say, it's from the work environment. And in fact, there was so much just like they were claiming stuff like that she was sleeping in class, and she was like, "Well, she talks." Sometimes she's like, "I'm sitting here teaching." So it gets to the point with her. I'll finish her story because she had it worse than I did probably. To fast forward probably to January or February, it got so bad that she had to take FMLA because they were just driving her crazy between her principal, which at the time was a brand new principal that Wes handpicked. That principal, when she was handpicked to be the principal of the school that year, she wasn't even a certified principal yet. She was in a principal training program that Wes had created, and she was still working on her master's degree for her principalship. So they had hired at Caucus Creek somebody that wasn't even a certified principal to be principal. And there were several other principals in the district that were actually like that. But anyways, long story short, she had to go on FMLA because they were just totally crazy. And, her therapist at the time said, this is the cause. She came back, and when she came back from her FMLA, she only had March. So she came back, she only had 2.5 months to go. Wes got a hold of her and said, "Hey, we need to have a meeting because I found all this stuff on you." At that point, she contacted KEA and said, "Look, here's what's happening." KEA said, "This ain't right." So to final this out, and this is where it gets bad with Wes on her end, is she sat down with KEA and Wes and actually recorded it, and I think she still has the recording for it, and it's pretty bad. Wes had this list of all this stuff that she had done. Granted, remember, she'd been on FMLA for a month, so she hadn't even been there. But it was stuff like I told you, that we had somebody, and everything was anonymous with him. He'd be like, "Oh, because of confidentiality, we can't tell you who said it, but we have somebody that reported you were sleeping in class." She said, "Was it one of my students?" "Nope." "Was it another teacher?" "We can't tell you that." And so the KEA rep looked and said, "You have evidence of this?" And Wes said, "Oh, well, no, we don't. We can't share it." He said, "Okay, you don't have anything." So then Wes was like, "Okay, we'll throw that out." So then he goes, "We have evidence of," and I can't remember what the other stuff was. It was 3 or 4 different things. It was actually probably 4 or 5 things. And the KEA rep looked at Wes and said, "Do you have any evidence of this?" Wes said, "Nope." And he was like, "Well, okay, you don't have anything." So Wes was like, "Okay, we got evidence." So he kept going, and eventually it was nothing. So the KEA rep says, "What's the point of this meeting?" And Wes said, "Well, I guess there's twofold. Either you guys stay on FMLA or you're coming back in." She goes, "Well," she's like, "I'd like to teach. And but the problem is, if you all keep harassing me, now it's gone from borderline harassment, my previous year. Now you got this cap on me. You're in here claiming I've done all this stuff. You have no evidence of any of this." And she goes, "Essentially, it's harassment." She goes, that I could have a lawsuit on you right now." He goes, "You're right." And he goes, "Okay, well, I guess we'll drop everything. You can start back in the classroom." It's on, I think, a Friday. He goes, "You can start back in the classroom on Monday and just continue on with your cap." And he said the biggest thing is, and this is what was the turning point. He said, "Your supervisor is no longer Haley Victory. Your supervisor is me. You report directly to me," which is illegal. You can't have a superintendent say, "I'm your direct supervisor." So she said, "No, I'm not playing by that rule." She said, "I'm gonna give you the option." And he said, "What's that?" And he said, "Either you're gonna leave me alone. We're not gonna do this. I'm gonna be right back in the classroom, and I'll go on about my business just like every other teacher does, or I'm gonna sue you." And Wes said, "Well, let me think of my options." So he got back with her and said, "Look, going to make you a deal. He said, I will buy you out of your contract, which is through June 30th, and I'm going to pay you for it. He was like, and you can just take off the rest of the day, and then once June 30th hits, you can find another job. She said, that's fine, because then I ain't got to worry about all my mental health issues and stuff. So that was the thing. He knew he was going to get sued by us, and he bought her out of her contract from, I'm going to say that was mid-March to June, which now, doing in my position now, I know things that can't be done. That's one thing that can't be done as a superintendent or as a district, for that matter. You can't pay anybody like they did my wife for services not rendered. So the deal that he really made with her to get out of a lawsuit from us because of the bullying and harassment was actually illegal, because they paid her for services she never rendered. So that was illegal on her end. So I can finish. That's her story in a nutshell. Of course, she could tell you a lot more.
Let me ask you. Let me ask you just a couple of questions. One of the things, the things that they'll do also is if your wife had any, if she had any sick leave days that were left. One of the things that they do is they'll say, we'll buy you out of your contract, but what that really means is they're just going to pay you for your sick leave days. Did that happen?
Right. No. So when she actually, they paid her for what she had, because she had FMLA. She had to take that month-long FMLA. She didn't have any more sick days.
I got you. Okay.
So she didn't have that. But the one thing that they did do, because of the buyout, it didn't count. That whole year did not count towards her retirement. So she actually lost, even though she got the money, she did lose a year, or a half a year, I guess. She lost a half a year of teaching credit towards her retirement. So now she's half a year behind, on her teaching credit. So that did hurt her on that end.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, and then rewind it back to me. So, like I said, they hired Laura Arnold in back in August. We started working together. Like I said, it was weird because she was my direct supervisor for 4 years, and then now she's working at Nelson County. She had all of a sudden started coming in our building, which is fine. She came in our building because she's the current technical ed working with her students. She came in my building about once a week and started. Then she started meeting teachers, students, and all that stuff. Nelson County had hired 2 coordinators that were underneath her, and they would collaborate with us. And their push was everybody, which is what echoes now. Everybody gets work-based learning. So Wes is pushing, going into August, going into the start of school, was you need to find more businesses that allow co-op students. In my field, in current technical ed, you're dealing with welders, you're dealing with electricians, you're dealing with nurses, you're dealing with auto mechanics. 90% of the business, I'm knocking on doors like crazy, which like I said, we gained a lot of work-based business, but a lot of them aren't taking students that are under the age 18 because of workers' comp. So we had gained a couple. They got all excited, and we had a really good partnership of a place that was out in Springfield, which is in Washington County. But the problem is you get places like that, and they're like, oh, you need to get more places like this. It's a great company. We got that my 4th year and only had 1 student apply for it. The 5th year, my last year there, we didn't have any students apply for it, and they got mad, going to August and said, boy, so you need to get more students apply. This is a great business. They're providing this money and a sponsorship to us. The problem was that the 1 student that I had that went into that business, they didn't want our students until after they graduated because they could be 18. They wanted them to start in June and do kind of like a trial base, to hire them as a trial basis over the summer. Well, the whole time that they were like a first-year employee, they were giving these students a shovel and saying, it was an excavation company. They were giving them a shovel and saying, all right, you got to dig, where all these other people they're working with are on backhoes and all these other big equipment things. And they were only paying, $10, $12 an hour at the most. I can go to McDonald's and flip a burger right now for $15 an hour, much less, well, I'm going to work out in the hot 100-degree weather, and I'm the one digging, doing hard labor. That's not the way our students work nowadays. You've got to have something that's enticing. So I kept trying to tell them that. They're like, oh, yeah, that's a good experience. They're going to that crit. And everything was like, it was my fault because my students, no matter how much I tried and enticed them, it was my fault. Wes, made it sound like it was my fault because I couldn't get more students to a business like that when give you another example. I had one of my construction kids that, they kept pushing work-based learning, which is fine because, I was all for it. But when I had one of my kids come back and say, hey, I work for one of these big construction businesses here in Bardstown, and I won't say the name, but they put him on a construction crew. This kid is 17, turned 18, I think, his senior year while he was working with him on this co-op. He said every time I go out on a job, they put down a construction crew of 10 to 12 people. There's 2 or 3 of them smoking weed on the site. He's like, I can't be around this. So he complained about it to his supervisor at the co-op, the business. They put him on another construction crew, and there they are drinking and smoking weed right there on that. So, and then it would come from Wes to me and Laura Arnold that say, hey, get more kids to work for this business. I can't recruit kids to a business that when I've got another kid coming back and saying, the culture at this place that I'm working at is terrible. So I would get the brunt of it. So that was a lot of the dialogue over the summer, like I said, going into August, the new year, get more kids work-based learning. We want more kids work-based learning, yada. So that year goes along. We were we were going after a grant to bring LaRue County in on my last year there. And so there was a lot of collaboration on this grant between Bardstown, Nelson County, and LaRue County. And we were, like I told you before, we were actually touring other facilities. We went all the way up to Owensboro to see theirs. We went to Fulton County to see Fulton County ATC. And then Fulton, and then we were in we actually flew all the way to Houston and saw some really good CTC, career technical centers in Houston area. The one I got to see was in the Spring Independent School District, and it was really good. And that was all helpful. But Laura Arnold is right there with us, and then people from Bardstown. And so I dealt with Nelson County, and we were very cordial, and we were saying, hey, this is the vision that we have for our ATC. This is where it's going. We want to be more like the ATCs in Houston. We want to start, engineering was a big push in Bardstown. We want to start looking at engineering program. Nursing was becoming big. So one thing that I worked on going into the following year, which the year I wasn't there anymore, that I don't get credit for, that now Wes and Nelson County is getting all the credit for, which is fine. But I started a partnership with Hardin Memorial Hospital. So that Hardin Memorial Hospital already had a partnership with Hardin County Schools, that they had a group of students from Hardin County coming to take tour, well, not really to do a job shadow at their hospital for a few weeks. So with the push that that I got down my throat of work-based learning, whether it was a co-op, job shadowing, any of them, I said, look, we could take a whole bunch of our students, because the push was, one, to get work-based learning, but it was also the push to get our students certified earlier and earlier. So I was getting my nursing students certified as CNAs as their junior year. Well, then they didn't have any classes to take as seniors, number one. Number two, hospitals wouldn't hire them because they weren't 18 yet. And 3, they couldn't be there all day, because the nurse's shift is 12 hours a day, or 10 hours a day, 4 days a week. So I went to Hardin Memorial Hospital, and I said, look, why don't you let us, Nelson County's told us they would pay for the bus every day. Why don't you let us bring our certified nursing students down here? I said, they'll do a rotation with you all, like a job shadowing rotation. You'll take one student on your labor delivery floor, one student in your ER, one student in your operating room, one student just on the main floor. I said, take groups of those students every 2 weeks. They'll switch and they'll get job shadowed. They thought that was a great idea, and they started it. Like I said, they started that the next year. I didn't get credit for that, but that was something that we started. So I was constantly getting, what he was asking throughout that semester. As an ATC, every year you've got to have, at minimum, you've got to have an advisory and a steering committee meeting once a semester, twice a year. So December comes along, and we're gearing up for our steering committee. Laura Arnold, like I said, had come to Nelson County, which meant that all my supervisors in Frankfort had changed hands. So they had just announced a couple weeks before that Jeffrey Adams, which was another ATC principal in Southeast Kentucky, was going to be my supervisor, and then the temporary supervisor that I had, Tom Thompson, he was actually going to take Laura Arnold's spot. which was cool because I really liked Jeff Adams. He was a laid-back guy. He knew his stuff. He'd been in ATC for 20-plus years. So he had been my supervisor literally for 2 to 3 weeks. He calls me up before that steering committee meeting in December and says, hey, I need to come in. Let's talk about an hour before your steering committee. I want to make sure everything's good with you and everything's going on. I said, okay, that's good. So all of a sudden he comes in, and about an hour before that steering committee meeting, he shuts my door and says, boys, we got to talk. And I said, what's up, Jeff? And he said, I just want you to know I'm going to preface this whole meeting I'm about to have with you. He said, I'm going to preface this that this is not for me. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, I've got to give you a corrective action plan. Now, my 4 years before that, and that just flagged me of what my wife was going through right then and there in the spot. I was like, in my 4 years before that, I never got any bad marks whatsoever on any of my evaluations. And this literally came out of the blue. And he told me, he said, I know this is out of the blue. He said, but just remember, this isn't coming from me. And I said, where is this coming from? He said, it's really coming from the local superintendents, which I knew the Bardstown superintendent I was good with. I mean, me and him talked, and his directors there, the director there that was really the one that was overseeing me on their side, collaborating with me, not overseeing me, but collaborating with me. We were good with. The principal I was good with. We were friends, outside of school. So he gave me this cap, and essentially in the cap, in fact, I've got it right here in front of me. It had listed 4 things that were problems, and then it was saying there was no industry certification growth from 2017-18. Which that one thing was good because that was something I already knew that I needed to grow on, increase my industry certs, which I had already that year because I'd already started getting, like I told you, my juniors certified. So I knew that was going to be, a big improvement anyway. The other 3 were directly from Wes Bradley, which they were going through my supervisor, and they said that the feeder district administrators feel more inclusive communication and a long-term vision are greatly needed at the ATC, which then Jeff Adams looked at me and said, I don't know what he really wants. He said, you need to get up with your feeder superintendents and ask them what that means because we don't know. And then it says, and it's all the wording, like when Wes gives you stuff, and they've seen it now in these presentations with the board meetings that the parents have seen. It's a lot of fluff and not a lot of substance. So like one of the things on my cap says there's been little of any growth in strategic partnerships leading to a substantial increase in work-based learning opportunities for students. So that's a lot of fluff to say I haven't got more partners or more students involved in work-based learning, which I had at the time. I mean, I had grown that, but previous years, it wasn't a push until, Wes made it. And then lastly, it said on my cap, intentional efforts still need to be made to offer more dual credit, which I'd had all my teachers that year certified dual credit with the exception of one, and he was an older teacher, and it was like pulling teeth to try to get him to do everything through ECTC to get it there. And his numbers were low and everything anyway, so it was going to be a fight with him. Anyway, so we go through the cap, and I'm like, this is crazy. That was, in fact, I've got to tell him that was December. He looks at me, Jeff Adams looks at me at the end of this meeting and says, look, this is off the record right here. He said, before this, he said, I've been in this position for 2 weeks, and Nelson County is the craziest one that I've had to work with. He said, and I said, what do you mean? He said, I'll just keep it short for you. He said, if I were you, he said, I'd be looking for a new job. He said, I would never say that to you. He said, but they're gunning for you. And I said, what do you mean they're gunning for you? He said, they want you out of this position. He said, I'd be looking for a new job because they're not going to stay. They're not going to stop until they get you. I said, okay. He said, work with them and see what they want because we don't know what they're really saying. He's like, and just remember, this cap's not for me. So he gives it to me. I sign it, go through that second semester. January rolls along. I start getting up with Wes and Laura Arnold and say, what is it that you want? He goes, I want you to meet, Wes says, I want you to meet with Laura Arnold once a week. I want you to send out a newsletter to all your stakeholders that say exactly what you're doing, how your industry certifications are coming along, and how your work-based learning is coming along. Cool. I did it. So I started every single week, every Monday. I did a Monday memo type thing. I put that out. All my stakeholders got it. All the superintendents got it. then I sat down with Laura Arnold every Monday, met with her, and gave her an update. They actually sat down with me with Laura, and then the superintendent Barstown. We all sat down, and it was almost like, they all just wanted to meet with me. At first, they just called me and said, "I just want to meet with you." This was the first time that they had actually sat down, and keep in mind, they are not my supervisors. They can't give me any evaluative feedback. So, and if they do, it's just like the person that works at a fast food restaurant says, "Hey, you need to do this," or parent says, "Hey, you need to do this." It's kind of like, I can take their advice, but you're not my supervisor. You don't have a direct impact on whether I'm here or fired or not. But they sat down with me and said, "You need to do this, this, and this," which went back to the Monday memos I sent out. They said, continue doing that, continue work-based learning. And then they kept harping on, during that meeting, they kept harping on a vision. Like, we need to see your vision. We need to see your vision. So I called my supervisor, Jeff Adams, at the time. So this was in January. And I said, "What are they talking about?" He said, "Buddy, I don't know." He said, "We've talked to them a couple times, and I just don't have a clue." Me and Jeff hung up. It wasn't a week after that. I got an email from KDE that said, "We're sorry to inform you, but Jeff Adams is no longer with us. He is retired." And Jeff Adams sent an email, said, "Thank you all for working with me." He said, "I know I've only been here for about a month and a half." He said, "But," he said, "this job isn't what I thought it was going to be, and I've decided to retire." And I think he was into the pool business or something. I think he did pool or something on the side. He had some kind of side business that he was going to go off to. And kind of got to talk to him. Not I didn't talk to him, but I talked to somebody else that actually knew Jeff that was at another ATC down in southeast Kentucky. And essentially, he said that Jeff got so tired of hearing from Nelson County, because between Laura Arnold and Wes, they were just wearing out KDE all the time, saying, "Hey, they need to do this, they need to do this, they need to do this." That he got tired of it. And like I said, he was only there for 2 months, two and a half months at most, and then he resigned. So now I'm getting a new supervisor. This guy's name's Larry Garrity. He comes in there. And then, like I said, his supervisor is Tom Thompson, who took Laura Arnold's position. Throughout that second semester of my last year there, didn't hear much. It was going good ever since I had that meeting with the two superintendents and Laura Arnold about, have the Monday memo, get more work-based learning opportunities, yada, yada. May, it was either April or May. Actually, I get the date on this. It was May 17th. Got it right. May 17th rolls around, near the end of the school year. Tom Thompson calls me up, who, like I said, took Laura Arnold's spot in Frankfurt. He calls me up and says, "Just give you a heads up, Wes is coming today to meet with you." I said, "What do you want to talk about?" He said, "Buddy," he says, "I don't know." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, he's called me. He calls me all the time." He said, "He wears me out." He said, "But he calls me and I don't have a clue what he's talking about or what he wants." He said, "We've been on him for weeks to tell us exactly what his expectation of what he wants from Nelson County ATC, and he won't tell us." He said, "We can't get it out of him." So in doing so, he said, when you meet with him today, he said, and I got it written down because I still got my notes from that day. He said, "Ask him exactly what he wants." And I said, "Okay." So Wes called me later, shot me an email and said, "Hey, can I meet with you later this afternoon?" I said, "That's fine." So Wes comes in and he asked me, how do I think it's going? I told him all the stuff that we've done. When we met back in January, I said, "I met all your expectations. We've increased work-based learning. I've got this Hart Memorial Hospital program that I'm working on for next year. I've collaborated with Spalding University to get all of our this year's students CNA certified, MNA certified." I said, "It's going good." I said, "What have you seen?" And he started talking to me. He started rambling. And like I said, I still got the notes sitting here in front of me from that exact meeting. That's why I've got it. He started talking about looking at national models of career centers, the coherence and the purpose, the values and the purpose, and then the vision value construct. And so he started writing all the stuff that I knew he was going to say because my supervisor, like the KD supervisor, Tom Thompson, had told me. So essentially, he started talking about how do your programs align to your vision, the value structure. He started talking about a handout that I needed to look at called Build Your Own Paradigm. So after he's done talking, I said, "Look, I talked to Tom Thompson. He just wants me to ask you, what do you really want? Like, what's the meat and the potatoes of what you want from me?" And And I'll never forget this. He said, "I'm glad you asked." And he had his coat on, his sport coat on, and he pulled out an envelope with it, and it's on a Nelson County letterhead, May 17, 2019. And keep in mind, the biggest thing is he's not my supervisor. He can't give me any type of paper, form, evaluative criteria at all. He's not my supervisor. But he gives me this paper, and, I've got it right here in front of me. But briefly, it says, the following data observations observed during the 1819 school year. Our conclusions. The Nelson County ATC lacks substantial awareness of how to develop a comprehensive mission, vision, and value structure that will drive a high-functioning ATC for the future of the community, and B, it lacks awareness of the current reality and fails to build coherence with programs that will allow Nelson County ATC to be a top-tier, high-performing environment. Essentially, he said, specific observations. These are the things he said on it. Instructionally, we struggle to articulate, develop, and implement a coherent shared vision, which that was his wording to me and to KE, the vision thing. And, I'd come up with a whole new 2020 vision that was really solid that I'd collaborated with our steering. So that's the thing, like the thing that drove our schools, regular schools have site-based decision-making councils. I had a steering committee and I had an advisory committee. So my steering committee is what drove me in my leadership for the school, which he was on and a part of. So he had input into that. And then each of my programs had advisory committees, which drove them. So for him to keep saying vision and mission, I went to every single advisory committee meeting that night and, looked at their notes, looked at the feedback. I collaborated with all of them. They were all on board. My steering committee at the time, had told me what they wanted. I was giving them what they wanted because in the spring steering committee, everything was good, which he said on there, and didn't really say much of all the other stuff. So then the second thing, instruction, he said, observed ongoing lack of student engagement in classrooms. That ATC instruction is totally different than a regular classroom. If I'm walking into a math classroom, I'm going to see students doing 2 plus 2. If I'm walking English, I'm going to see them reading Romeo and Juliet. If I'm walking into a car shop at the ATC and they're turning a wrench and learning how to change a tire, that's learning. Like he would see that, if you've got 3 or 4 cars and you got 4 students on a car, because let's say you have 18 in the class, if you've got 4 students on a car, 2 left over, and they're all turning wrenches on a car, they're learning. Like he didn't get that, the way that you learn in career and technical ed is totally different than a regular classroom. When you walk in and you've got your I can statements, and then you've got your learning targets of what you're doing for the day. We had all that stuff, but we'd even brought in a school bus that the whole school, we had a school bus donated to us that we had community partners going to donate to it, and we were actually taking that school bus and turning it into a tiny house. So we were incorporating every single program into our school, whether it was the automotive crew that was checking the alignment and all that stuff that was on it, the drivability of it. It was our welders that were that had actually cut the whole roof off, raised it 1.5 feet, welded the bus back together, and were welding the windows in. Our carpenters were obviously going to build the whole inside. Our electrical students were going to make sure everything on the inside was had wired and was coherent and running and everything else. Our nursing students was actually teaching the safety aspects of each step along the way. Our IT students were actually going to make the bus wireless and everything else. So we were doing hands-on, real-world, exciting projects. So for him to say, observed lack of student engagement in classrooms, that was false. The culture, teachers lacked trust and belief in the school leadership. There was, other than the nursing program, there was no turnover in my building, which goes to the next thing. It says human resources, incapacity to compel individuals to aspire to join the ATC. The nursing program was problematic because we had a high turnover rate in that program because of the pay and the high demand for nurses right now. So to give you an example, I had one of my teachers that I hired was a great teacher in my building. I hired her, I think she started in September. She worked for Norton Hospital out of Louisville. She starts in my building in September. 1 month later, 4 weeks into working for me, she was doing a great job. Norton calls her back up and says, we're going to triple your salary if you come back, literally. So she was making probably $50,000 with me. Norton comes and says, hey, we're going to give you $150,000 salary. Why would anybody in their right mind, if you're getting your salary tripled, not leave? And that was what I was having to deal with in my nursing program. So, he put this on this paper to incapacity to compel individuals to aspire to join ATC. How can you get somebody to join ATC when Norton's going to pay you $150,000? I mean, yeah, you want to have a culture and stuff, but $150,000 talks a lot more than I can pay a teacher at $50,000.
Right.
And then incapacity to articulate performance expectations, values. So, I mean, a lot of stuff that he put on here. The next thing is struggles to authentically engage key stakeholders in developing vision for the ATC. A lot of it's just fluff because the steering committee was totally on board. We had a lot of collaboration. We had a ton of sponsorship and engagement from those stakeholders because we wouldn't have been able to get our 2 grants that we got. We got 2 grants at the end that year 4 and year 5. We wouldn't have been able to get that had we not had a lot of collaboration from it. So it was constant like that. So he went through that whole letter, and then he ended it. Like I said, I wrote it down so that I would never thought. So I'd say, with all this, I was like, there's really no substance on it because you're talking about incapacity, aspiring, aspirations. I said, well, what are your goals? What do you think that you could see for this school? And he said, well, the first thing I'd start at is I would watch an Andy Stanley podcast. He says, Andy Stanley has a lot of good things. And I said, okay. I said, I can start watching Andy Stanley podcast. I said, what else do you want? I said, specifically, Mr. Thompson from KD wants me to ask you specifically, what is it that you want from us? I was like, you've been on us, all year. What do you want? He said, I'll just be honest with you. He said, I will tell you it's like a painter. He's like, a painter goes to work every single day and he doesn't smell the paint. He said, everything's good. The walls look good. The painter is good. He said, but I'm that outside person. He said, I come in this building. He said, that paint stinks. He's like, and really, that we need a change in this building. I said, what do you mean? And he said, and like I said, I had this written down, so this is word for word from him. He said, I'm going to tell you what it's going to take. He said, it's going to take a change of leadership here. He said, I'm coming after you. He said, if you don't leave, he said, then what I'll do is I'll starve you of your resources. And not just your resources, I'll starve you emotionally as well. He said, I've already checked on the ATC. The cost for me to take it over is $650,000 to go around you and for me to take it over. He said, I don't have the resources, that money right now. He said, but eventually I will get it. And he said, I'll get this ATC. And I said, okay, that's all I need to hear. So we left that. And then, that was actually, like I said, from dealing with my wife, that was the first strike against him. And him, with me, with Laura Arnold, the hiring there and finding that money, that was the second strike. This was kind of like the fourth strike. The third strike, during that, and this is kind of goofy, but it goes to tell you what type of person he is. And I still use this example today on him. I'll never forget, in probably March, April-ish of that semester, we had a monthly principals meeting every month with him. And that March, April one, we were sitting at the preschool, Nelson County Early Learning Center, and we were having our meeting. I'll never forget, I was sitting right there. And the end of the year's coming up, so the CSIP, which is the Comprehensive School and Program Improvement Plans, Comprehensive School Improvement Plans have to be due for the end of the year going into the next year. So we were going through all these things. One of the principals looked at Wes and said, Wes, we've got a deadline coming up on the CSIP. What's your thoughts on us doing this? Should we implement this? Should we put this in our CSIP? And I'll never forget this. So he looked at that teacher and said, you're submitting that to KD, right? And I said, yeah, we have to have that in by whatever the date was on that CSIP, June 30th or whatever it was. He said, it's simple. He said, one thing that I learned, he said, is that they don't really check those things too hard. He said, so what I used to do, he said, if I ever wanted an extension, he said, they're fillable blanks, right? And they said, yeah, you can tell them in. That's what you got to do and hit submit. He said, what I would do, he said, I would go in there and push period, tab, next box, period, tab, period. He said, just go put all those boxes in and put one period, one dot in each of those. He said, hit submit. He said, that will allow that form to your CSIP to submit, and it'll look like it's filled out. He said, KDE won't catch that for 2 or 3 months. And then when they come and ask you and say, why is this all just a period form? You can just say, oh, I must have been a computer glitch or something like that. And so he said, then you can submit it to him. He said, that got to buy you some time and give you about 2 or 3 months. He said, they don't care about that stuff. So right there, as a leader, as a person, the 3 things I always ask myself before I make a decision: is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it safe? Before I make any decision, right there, that's so unethical right there. And especially to convey that to your other principals in the building, I thought that was like, man. So that just goes.
Is that a legal document?
That the CSIP is something that all schools are required to have by the Kentucky Department of Education in their improvement plan. Yes.
So it's a legal document as far as a policy is concerned, and certainly by the Kentucky Department of Education. And he's also openly admitted to computer fraud.
Right. Yes. Yep. So yeah, there was that. So when he said that I'll never forget, because I remember exactly where I was sitting, exactly where I was, and I was like, well, I can't believe that he just said that. And then, like I said, so when he ended that meeting with me on May 17th and gave me that letter, I looked at him, the last thing I said to him, I said, well, you're not my supervisor. I said, so I'll take all this into account, but I appreciate your suggestion. But, just looking at that, looking at what he'd done to my wife, looking at, talking to Jeff Adams that only worked there for a month and a half, looking all the way to, Bob Morris retiring as soon as she tried to file a harassment thing. It looked like everybody was turned over. And, one thing that the very first win that me and my wife ever got of this was that principal that she hired, our second year there, which that's second year there was really even going on with us. That principal there was a great principal. Like I said, it was one of the best principals. And when she left, she said, "Boy, this place is a mess." She said, "I'm getting out of here." And she had moved, uprooted her family from Lexington, I believe, and moved to Nelson County. Only lived there a year and moved back. So it was stuff like that was just that was going on, and that it was crazy. And it was looking at those 4 things that had been done, said, etc., just to the person, like between the ethical stuff, the legal stuff. It was just what are we doing here? So I mean that was a majority of what happened to me and my wife when we were there. I'm sure there's some stuff that I missed and I can't forget, because like I said, we were there 5 years and had to deal with him and little Arnold for the last year and a half, and it was just a lot of the stuff. As I look back at my last year there, now looking back, at their website and seeing who's coming and going and stuff, you look at the people that are there and in positions. They're all handpicked people. A lot of them are from Thomas Nelson and his time there. You look at the Horizons Academy principal. He was from Thomas Nelson. Both the Thomas Nelson administrators are ones that came up from under his tutelage while he was at Thomas Nelson. The principals at the Nelson County, the middle school there, the local middle school, my Kentucky home, they're all principals and people that learned under him from Thomas Nelson. When he got rid of everybody at the board office, most of those people that he handpicked were from Thomas Nelson or had something from Thomas Nelson, with him. So it was all kind of, and the whole time I was there that last year, I thought the whole play was that he was going to put Laura Arnold in there. The whole play to get me out was to put Laura Arnold in there. She never did, but, talking to some of my teachers after the fact, after I left, they say that she was in there a lot. She got into, after I left, she got into it with a couple of my teachers, and she's, we had a phenomenal electrical teacher. He since I've left, Nelson County eventually took over Nelson County ATC. So his $650,000 plan came into fruition. And as soon as I was gone, the HVAC teacher and HVAC program was done, which, that one was probably going to go anyways because of the lack of demand by the students. But I've heard, since then that our CAD program that we had, which was a phenomenal CAD program, I'd hired the teacher in, that this year they actually gave him a notice that said his program's going to be done away with. So he's actually gone. And for him to say, we need more work-based learning and more industry certifications, that was one of the highest rated industry certification programs that we had at the ATC, because all of those kids were getting AutoCAD certified, and then a lot of them were either going to Louisville Speed School to be an engineer. UK, we had several at UK. Local industry was eating those up left and right, because Bardstown has a lot of wood shops, and they would need CAD programmers to do design of cabinets, and then also houses. We had a great there was there was three off the top of my head businesses there in Bardstown that directly used CAD, and as soon as they had an opening, they would contact me and hire a student right off the bat. So for them to get rid of CAD this year, it's a big blow to the ATC because of the program they had. We had you looked at it, and like I say, it goes back to that letter of, it says lack of, my words, it's when I walk in, I feel like these kids aren't doing anything, but they're learning CAD, which is when they go out, they're more likely going to be an engineer, and CAD, they're going to be using AutoCAD or Autodesk, one of the two, and that's what engineers start off on, and that's what we were prepping our students for. They got certified for that. They had the leg up, and they were, every one of our students that had ended up going some type of co-op never got fired and always stuck with that. They never changed their career. They loved it. I mean, they were very passionate about that program. So to see that, and then, one thing they pushed big time when in my last year, getting that grant was another engineering program. Our program is called Project Lead the Way, which I think that's probably why they're getting rid of the CAD program, because Project Lead the Way, I never wanted it because it was such a high dollar program. So Project Lead the Way, they sent us, Nelson County sent me to Elizabethtown Independent to view them, because they already had Project Lead the Way. And I saw their high school. I observed their high school and their middle school programs. With UK coming down and kind of giving their spiel on Project Lead the Way, I realized that the startup of it was about $17,000 just for the program. Every class that a teacher had to teach, they had to pay $4,000 a year, or $4,000 to get that teacher trained. So at minimum, to get a student industry certified, they had to take 3, but to get them the students completers, you had to take 4. So 4,000 times 4 classes, that's $16,000. So $16,000 right there, plus the initial $17,000 plus. All students had to have an X robot type of car, which would have been $500. So you're paying $500 a student, and then for their curriculum, it was something like $500 per year per class. So you're talking about another $2,000. Project Lead the Way is great, but a lot of the times, once you pay for a teacher to get trained, another county district that's higher paying picks them off. Thank you for paying them free training for us. Now they're going to come work for us. And when I went to observe E-Town Independent, I actually literally walked into their high school class, and the project that they were doing in their high school Project Lead the Way class was the identical project that my CAD teacher at the time was doing at the ATC. I said, the curriculum's identical. Why are we paying all this money to get Project Lead the Way when we're already doing the same thing, and the industry certification is the same, and it's just, it's a waste of money, and it's going to draw the same student. I mean, if I'm going into engineering and I've got a engineering program or a CAD program, which is the same exact thing, and they're teaching the same, I've got to pick one or the other. So you're essentially dividing and conquering. So by getting rid of that program this year, essentially they're forcing, Wes is pushing and forcing all of the students in that would originally take CAD, he's forcing them all into Project Lead the Way, which to me on the outside doesn't make any sense, because it's the same program, yet you're spending all this money. So to me, now that I'm gone, it looks like, it's one of those things of, well, we started Project Lead the Way since I've been here. Look at the numbers now. We've got numbers coming in. Students are loving this program. They're getting AutoCAD certified, and I'm the one that started this program. And so he gets put a feather in his cap for that, when really we were already doing that under the program of CAD, and it was the same students getting the same industry certification. So it's just, that program was already there, and Project Lead the Way is the one he started under his watch. So that was kind of weird, And then, like I said, we had an electrical teacher that was phenomenal that he got rid of. That was that kind of, talking to the electrical teacher. It was kind of a bad deal between. There was bad blood between him and the Nelson County school system. So, with Laura Arnold and with Wes, like I wasn't there last year when all that so that's pretty much my story along, the 50,000 view hike, the short ton of it. Most of the big things that I can remember. Like I said, I'm sure there's plenty of other things that I have. And it's funny. It's funny that all the thing that made me laugh the most was all of this came up. I'm just going to say, with this push from Nelson County and the parents and stuff, all this push came up. I'm going to say in April. It may have been May or even earlier. When I found out about it, it was about April. When I left Nelson County Schools, they never deactivated my email. So a lot of the stuff that I needed and could pull, I still have it saved, all my old stuff, but I was still getting emails because I was still on the listserv at Nelson County. So when I left, I saved all my emails. I still have them all. But it was funny because I could still see emails that were coming across to the principal and stuff like that on listserv. When all of this, which they, like I said, for a year and a half, they never knew I was there. They flew over, and all of a sudden, when all of this goes down with the schools, with him trying to get rid of the middle schools and the parents complaining and stuff like that, I went to log into the emails, just trying to figure out if I'm still getting those emails or whatever. All of a sudden, my account's disabled and it's no longer there. And, ideally, after I leave, as soon as I leave, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they should have disabled my account then. It was just funny that it was odd that they never caught my account was still active for a year and a half, almost 2 years, until all this stuff came up, and then all of a sudden my account's disabled and I can't get to anything anymore.
Well, make sure you keep those emails.
Yes, yeah.
Don't get rid of them. Let me ask.
No, I got to say.
Let me ask you a couple of things, just to go back to the moment when he was in your office or wherever you guys were, and he reached into his pocket. He said to you,
right.
he said to you, you said, I'll starve you of your resources, and I'll starve you emotionally. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I got that written down, word for word, right? Exactly what he said. It's right in front of me.
Yeah. See, I mean, it's beyond evident that he's a tyrant. There's no doubt about that. He has all the characteristics of somebody who is not a leader at all. Just by listening to you talk, and this is my opinion, but just by listening to you talk, you seem like 100% a strong leader, and you're the exact kind of person who needs to be left alone.
Right.
I mean,
and that's the thing. I appreciate the compliment. That's the thing, and this is what I said. This is what I told. Vanessa, I said, look, it'd be good if, I'd agree with him maybe, and I could do my own, I'm confident enough to say, hey, if I'm not good, tell me, that's fine. But I taught it 9 years at Bath County High School, and Paul Prater was my supervisor. He was my principal, and I will to this day tell you that Paul Prater is probably the best principal I've ever seen statewide, that I've worked for, that I've heard about. He's, in fact, he is so good. He works for Kentucky Department of Education now, training new principals for the P3 program. If you have a question, he's one to call answering. Like, he's the best leader I've ever dealt with. When he evaluated me for 9 years straight, I always got great reviews, evaluations, everything. There was never really any concerns. He taught me strategies. He blows me away. I could talk about him all day and rave on him. I go to Nelson County my first 4 years, even going into my 5th year, even my last year, my bosses at the time, I got good evaluations. Everything was good. Never got anything. And now at Gallatin County, I'm here 2 years. My evaluations are great. I'm doing a great job. So the common denominator is, one, Wes wasn't my supervisor, but two, for him to give me a paper that says, hey, you're not doing this, you lack the leadership, this, and this. If all of those 16 years that I've been in education added up to, even when, going back to my first job, working at Kmart, working at, for Brown County as a sub, any of my years of employment whatsoever, not just the 16 in education, I've never really got a bad review from anybody. And, so this is the one random blip. And he wasn't even my evaluator. He didn't even have the right to evaluate me, but giving me this, what's the common denominator is what I ask. Am I the common denominator? We're 16 years of education. I constantly got to fight for a job. I get pink slip, yada, yada, yada. There's stuff I need to prove on as a person, as a leader. That's not the common denominator. The one oddball is the one thing that I got from Wes Bradley that says, hey, you stink as a leader. Your school stinks. You're like a painter. and you can't smell how bad your paint is, but when I come in, I can smell it, and it stinks. So that's the oddity to me, not the other 15 years, 16 years that I have in education.
Yeah, that's well said. He is certainly the problem, and there's no doubt about it. Because again, like you said, you can't have that many positive evaluations, and then all of a sudden he shows up, and then you get a horrible evaluation where nothing makes sense, and then you leave, and then it's positive evaluations again. This is the unfortunate part, and I want to make sure that you and your wife understand this. Is that I've been through the exact same thing myself,
Gotcha.
in two separate states, and.
Yep.
And unfortunately what happens is that those that really want you bad and want you out of the business or want to shut you up, they will follow you wherever you go, and they'll lie to your supervisors or they'll lie to the State Department of Education about you and XYZ. So it's that kind of a lack of leadership that not only gives them away, but it should be beyond evident to everybody in Nelson County that, again, not only is Wes Bradley the problem, but that he doesn't care about anybody who works there, and that he doesn't care about the well-being of the people within that work environment. Because, let alone the way that he treated you and your wife.
Right. Yep, that's right. That's exactly right.
Well, let me ask you this: how's your wife doing?
Oh, and that's the thing. She's doing great. Once again, this is her. Like I said, she lost this year because of all that nonsense Nelson put her through. So this is her technically 12th year, but they count as 11th year. But all the other times, she worked for Montgomery County for 5 years, which was the top 50 elementary school in the state of Kentucky, and she got rave reviews there on her evaluation. For 3 years at Nelson County, actually for all 5 years, she got really good. She got a good evaluation. That was the other thing that didn't make any sense on both of our ends. For 5 years, both of our evaluations were spot on. They would never tell us anything that really, it was like something that just stood out big time that, you need to work on. It was, you always need to work and get better and improve as either a teacher or the leader, as a person. And I get that. I accept that. But, in our evaluations, it was never just something huge. This is so wrong on your evaluation that it's going to lead to this cap. They never went hand in hand. And as for her 5 years at Montgomery County, she had great evaluations, even at Nelson County and now at Gallatin County. She just took her evaluation a month ago, and it was pretty much exceptional across the board, which is the highest rating as a teacher you could be. So now, with my 16 years, with her 11 years, there's one common denominator that was a blip on the radar for both of us, and it was just 1 year under one person, and it didn't even have anything to do with our evaluation. Like I said, he couldn't even evaluate me, but with her, he kind of could. He wasn't her direct supervisor, although he tried to be, and it was on our evaluations, instructionally as a teacher, they couldn't put anything to knock on there. So it was the corrective action plans that we were getting that said something that totally didn't relate to any one of our job descriptions. But she's doing great now. She's loving it here. Her headaches have all pretty much gone away, and she's now going to be on site-based council here for her school this year. And she's one of the leaders of her school, so she's doing great.
That's great. Let me ask you this, unless you have anything else that you'd like to add, but what advice do you have for the people who are working in Nelson County, and what advice do you have for the parents that are having to deal with Wes Bradley and continue to deal with this nonsense that's going on there?
I think they just need to keep on the fight. I'm not there anymore to speak up, but they need to keep on. I wouldn't have said, I probably wouldn't have had the same opinion if I wouldn't have been there through the Anthony Moore era. I'd never seen Bath County do it different. Like our board and our superintendent didn't get along for a few years. Nothing really ever happened. So I came from 9 years of, okay, you might not like a superintendent, but you're stuck until the end of the contract, and then there you go. But then in Nelson County, enough uproar was caused with Anthony Orr to get him out that I saw, change can happen. And I think, one, it's going to be interesting with Nelson because Orr was not a local. He wasn't from Nelson County. He was from Lexington. So I feel like the board didn't sense that that they didn't have that connection to him. They didn't have that tie to him, and it was easier to let them go. Bradley is from Nelson County, so I feel like they're probably tied a little bit, more to him, and it would be harder for them to let them go. So I think you still got to keep it up like they did for Orr and keep at it. Don't let the summer get you and say, oh, we're out of school. I would stay at every board meeting, I saw in the paper yesterday, the Kentucky Standard, that Wes had come out and said, my first few years here, you could count the number of open records requests we had on one hand. In the last 6 weeks, we've had 60. And then he said, and that's not fair to the teachers, or to the staff that works here, or to the students that go here. Well, if you're not doing anything shady, why would it be unfair? Just everything's open, and let them see it. So it's working. You got to keep on keeping on, and if the board will not change their opinion because he's a local, then you have to really put your you have to really go. If you really believe that you need change, then you have to have those parents and those community members that will actually run for the board office. And you saw that in Clark County, Kentucky, this past year. Several members of several parents were very upset of how the Clark County superintendent handled the COVID situation of constantly going in and out of school, which, to his credit, that was really coming down from the state. He had no control of, whether we're in person or not. Well, come those November elections, two parents got elected over the current board members. When they started in January, that was their whole agenda, was to get that superintendent out. They got one other board member to flip, and then it was a 3-2 vote, and all of a sudden the superintendent's gone. So now Clark County this year will have a new superintendent just because of that. So if you look at Clark County, you can make things happen, just by getting 2 in there, and if you can't, you get 2 in there this year and you can't flip them, the one vote like Clark County did, then 2 more years, then you can get another one in there, and there you go. So it can happen. You just got to stay vigilant. You got to, you keep on keeping on, and then you can't make the change to get the current board, to do what needs to happen to what's best for students. Then you get on the board yourself and you make it happen, because ultimately that's what everybody in a position like I'm in wants to have, what's best for all students of Kentucky, because I want to see Kentucky as a state grow and be one of the best in the nation. When I go on trips, and sometimes I go on trips, if I go to Alaska, California, Hawaii, Colorado, New York, wherever, I want to be proud from Kentucky. I'm in education in Kentucky. I don't want to have to say, hey, we're in the bottom 10. I'm in Kentucky. I'm in the bottom 10. I want to make it better. And you can only make it better by starting one person, one district, one county, and then that will change the state. So, and that was actually, going back to that conversation on May 17th that I had with Wes, when he started talking about vision and where we're going. I said, look, I'd read a book that year. He's all about book studies and stuff. I said, I read a book by Tony Dungy. It's called The Soul of the Team. And I said, I think we're really going into what was going to be my 6th year. I said, I think we're really going to look at that as a school. I said, it could really change the school, but not only this school. I said, it could change this entire district if we went with it. And I said, SOUL is an acronym, and Tony Dungy uses it. I said, S is for selflessness, putting somebody else in front of you. Every time you make a decision, every time you help a student, even get your students to put others in front of them. I said, S, be selfless. I said, O is ownership. Take a little pride in what you do. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're an administrator, take a little pride in what you do. If you're a student, take some pride in the work that you're doing. U is for unity. We're all going to be one. We're going to be a district together. Let's be unified in the decisions and what we're doing. And then L is a larger purpose. For me, that larger purpose is I'm doing it for God and, for Jesus, because I love the Lord, and that's my purpose in life. If you're not religious and that's not your purpose, then do it for a larger purpose. You're here to, make yourself better than what you became in. If you live in poverty, then your larger purpose is to get your family out of poverty. So I said, if we can implement what Tony Dungy talks about in that book, that soul of a team, selflessness, ownership, unity, and a larger purpose, I said, we can take this district places. And that's when he started talking about, the book, or the Andy Stanley podcast that, and then that was when he talked about the painter and everything else, and he got away from that. But, so there's things, like that that are just when administrators bring those ideas to him. It's not his idea. He shoots it down. And teachers exactly the same thing. Don't be scared. Share. If you, especially your teacher, you got tenure. There's, he can put a lot of pressure on you, but if you're strong-willed, then you can end up. The grass is greener on the other side.
Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.